Okay, so you are now part of this is called Escaping the Undertow, and this is episode 6, I believe. And so just to introduce you to people, this is Adam Campbell. We were first year law students together. Actually, yeah, first year law students together in 2009 at UNB. And you've had quite a journey from then to now. And before I start kind of peppering you with questions, um, I was saying to my wife and some friends recently when I saw your story about what happened. I literally said this was probably one of the last people that I might have thought about would go through, some mental health struggles at some point in his life, because I vividly remember we were part of. I don't want to go too far into depth on this story, but we were part of the same pub crawl group
Yeah,
in,
yeah, I do remember that.
in first year law school.
Yeah, I saw
And
some photos. I
what?
have
Yeah, there's
incriminating photos.
they're not too incriminating, but
So,
I remember you going out that night, and you were part of the shenanigans, and then getting up the next morning and running a marathon. Um, the rest of us are just going, none of us would have ever made that. But it's just it's something when somebody you knew that was always so positive and really seemed to have it all together. I think you've got a lot of stories that you could tell people. So why don't you just start with telling me what's happened kind of since law school and how you ended up kind of where you are in the stories that I've seen you post. And it seemed there was a lot of difficult, tragic things that happened.
yeah, no. Thanks for saying that. And no, and I definitely have fond memories from law school. I really enjoyed, our days there for sure. So I guess to give a little bit of context, as well as being a lawyer, I've also been a professional athlete since the age of 17.
Mhm.
I'm 43 years old now, and I'm still fortunate uh, to call myself a semi-professional athlete. What that means has changed over the years, but basically, I'm an adventure athlete is the best way of describing it to people.
Right.
So I rock climb, I ice climb, I run in the mountains, and I ski. And I just like to cover a lot of distances in the mountains. And I've luckily, been able to live in some really beautiful places to do that. So I was living in Canmore, Alberta, which is in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. So just outside of Banff. People may know that a little bit better. And these days I live in Squamish, British Columbia. So
Mhm.
just outside of Vancouver on the way to Whistler. So you're right on the ocean, but with mountains right there. So it's sort of the best of all worlds, really, in a lot
Yeah.
of senses, and a lot of natural beauty. And professionally, I have worked as as a lawyer, and these days I'm doing a lot more work with my sponsors, sort of helping design product and brand marketing. So career's taken a really interesting
Right.
path, but it's kind of it's sort of also sort of being the nature of my life, sort of following these interesting opportunities and
Yeah.
being a little bit adventurous, and maybe not necessarily uh, the path I ever would have expected.
Right.
But the one thing with doing these mountain adventures that I get to do, and these activities are quite dangerous
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, and I spend a lot of time doing in quite dangerous terrain, and unfortunately through that, I've lost a number of friends, who've died in the mountain environments, like people that are pushing the limits of what they're doing. So it can be quite dangerous. And unfortunately, in 2016, I had a really bad rock climbing fall.
Right.
I fell about, well, almost 300 feet off the side of the mountain. It wasn't a straight fall. I sort of tumbled down a series of ledges when a big block pulled out on me when I was trying to do we were climbing without ropes at the time, and doing an alpine climb, trying to move fast. And I was really, really fortunate to survive that, but I broke my back and my hip and had really bad internal damage from that. But luckily, I was able to make like an almost full recovery. And the one thing that you may not know as well is right after law school, I was married at the time when we were there, I was recently married, and a year or yeah, my first year of articling, the woman that I was seeing ended our relationship. Well, sorry, the person I was married to
Mhm.
ended our relationship, and we'd been together for a decade.
Right.
And so that was, that took a number of years for me to recover from, and I didn't really cope with it.
Mhm.
At the time, I kind of basically ran away into the mountains, and I coped
Right.
with it by, working a lot and running in the mountains basically.
But it
So
always it always catches up with us, doesn't it?
it does, yeah. Kind of the way that I've heard it described is, if you don't deal with it, it gets buried in the basement and just gets stronger and stronger, and sort of grows inside you.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And so that was in 2012. And so in 2016, when I had my accident, I was still kind of dealing with that. Like my relationships after my first marriage ended, I had a really hard time committing to anybody else and had a lot of trust issues. She left me for somebody else. Um, and I had a really hard time trusting, basically partners. And I was really closed off and didn't really allow people back into my life. And I at the start, like I'd actually just met somebody prior to that accident, and it had a lot of internal conflict going on, and that accident, in a lot of ways, kind of shook some sense into me in a
Mhm.
certain light. And it's funny how there can be these positive outcomes from really bad experiences, and it
Right.
made me sort of do like a deep evaluation into what was happening. And I realized that that I had been quite closed off, and it made me have to be vulnerable as well, because all of a sudden I lost my ability to use my body. Like I was in a
Right.
hospital bed with a broken back and a broken hip, and up to the day before, I was literally one of the fittest people in the world. I could quite literally run up mountains.
I don't doubt that.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I did,
Yeah.
and that was really humbling. And through that process, I sort of started to let my guard down quite a bit, and I did a lot of like just personal evaluation while I was stuck in the hospital bed. And I realized that I was closing myself off to the people that really mattered most to me in my life, and so I opened myself up, and so it made me a lot closer with my family, which was really important. My family spread out around the world. Um, and then it also allowed me to open up to this woman that I'd started seeing, and really let her know how I was actually feeling about her. And it brought us really close together. And she was all, I mean, she was a doctor.
Yeah.
She was doing her residency when we met. And, but she was also a wonderful mountain athlete. And so she
Right.
sort of became my partner in the mountains, and it really changed my approach to being out in nature. And so rather than approach the mountains from a competitive aspect, it was more about just being in the mountains with friends and just trying to have these like really cool experiences with people, which you can have, like going for a walk with somebody, you can have better conversations with people than
Mhm.
you often do in other settings. And so we got to have these really wonderful experiences together, like going to the mountains. Like we went to 5 different continents together. We went to the Himalayas, down to South America, across Canada, throughout Europe and Africa, climbing and running and, surfing. And so it was a really, really cool
Amazing.
life together.
Yeah.
Yeah, she shared my sense of adventure. And but unfortunately, in January of 2020, I was out skiing with her, and we were madly in love. And she was very much my soulmate, if such a thing exists, or as as close as one can get to having that. And in January 2020, I was skiing with her and we were backcountry skiing, so that means you're not using chairlifts. You're hiking up mountains and trying to ski them. So it's a slightly different style of skiing. And when we were back there, we were out there with a friend, and an avalanche got triggered, and she got buried and unfortunately died in the avalanche while I was there with her. Um, and then that was deeply, deeply traumatic to lose her in that way. It was devastating. And as we all know, 2 months later, or a month later, basically, COVID hit and the entire world shut down as well.
Right.
So I kind of had this double dose of, my entire life just collapsed
Yeah.
around me. I lost my, uh, you know, I lost my love, lost my wife in a really, really tragic, horrible accident. That was quite traumatic. It was
I
very,
can't,
very,
yeah, I can't think of any other word to use other than traumatic.
yeah.
I don't know how you deal with that.
No, it was horrible. And at a time when I needed community more than ever. And
Right.
I was leaning heavily on community as well at the time.
Right.
The world shut down and became deeply isolating.
Right.
And so my world sort of collapsed around me at the time. So I went from, having this, I was married to a really beautiful, wonderful woman. I had a wonderful law practice going in Canmore, in the town we wanted to live in. She'd started her medical practice there as well. And, we were traveling the world, living this really grand, adventurous life. And suddenly it all collapsed around me. And I remember actually a couple of days after the avalanche happened, it was a really, really cold day in January, and I was walking across the Bow River, which runs through town, and it was, as I say, it was one of those really, really frigid mountain days, and I remember just looking at the water and just thinking how much easier it'd be if I just jumped at that point and just sort of ended it, because I knew that the ride ahead of me was going to be horrible. But I also, I thought about my family in that same moment, and I thought about the pain that they were all going through as well with losing Laura.
Mhm. Did you ever
And,
express those feelings to them before, you kind of took any further steps?
no, well, not at that moment, but I instantly realized I needed to start getting help right away, and so I went to, I called a therapist and went into therapy like right away. And I didn't need to tell them that I'd had those sorts of thoughts, because they could just see the sort of state I was in. Like
Right.
I would walk anywhere and like I'd get these reminders of Laura, and I would just crumble like in the middle of the street. I would literally just collapse. Walked
Right.
into a local bookstore. Like Canmore is a really small town here. It's a town of like, what is this, like 12,000 people. So everybody knows
Right.
you. And
Yeah.
everybody knew Laura and me, especially because, professional athlete, lawyer,
Right.
doctor,
It's
no one in town, right?
hard
Like
to be anonymous. Yeah.
hard to be anonymous. And then also, the avalanche and her death got quite a lot of media attention as well. So everybody knew what happened. So walking through town, people just didn't know what to say either.
Right. Yeah.
It's none of us are really well equipped to cope with these sorts of tragedies. And,
Hmm.
I could tell in people's eyes that they had deep empathy and sadness, but they also just didn't know what to do. So some people would just like cross the street when they'd see me rather than like talk to me.
Right.
And it's nobody's fault. Like this, nobody is some people just aren't equipped or know how to talk about it. And,
Hmm.
or yeah, so and I remember, as to say, like walking into this bookstore and just sort of, picking up a book, and something triggered, reminded me of Laura in that moment. And I collapsed and like literally collapsed to the floor and just a crying heap. And so once again, just like being deeply vulnerable and raw, and there's nothing I could do about it at that stage. And then over the next year and a bit, I continued in therapy and sort of going to support groups, but as I said, COVID happened, and
Everything
that
shut
all
down. Yeah.
yeah, that all felt really hard to do that. And also kind of lost my ability to go outside, was once again for me is a form of deep therapy. And the mountains, a place that I'd always gone to for safety, was also where Laura died and where I'd had my accident. So all of a sudden they
Right.
felt
So it's not
different.
the same, not quite the same place anymore.
No, exactly. Yeah. But restrictions started to ease a little bit, and so I still was able to start getting back out a little bit with seeing a few more people, and I stayed in therapy. And then later that summer, I started up into a new relationship with somebody, which was hard. Starting a new relationship in one of those situations is hard, but it was also like lonely.
Right.
And we all want love and companionship. And I found this, and it was in a friend of mine and somebody that Laura and I had known for quite a while.
Good.
And we left town, and seemingly it sort of felt a little bit like, I was starting to, like, the ground was starting to get a little bit less shaky under my feet. And so we saw, so I stopped going to therapy for a little bit as well. And, after about 4 months, or maybe 6 months or so, this person ended the relationship. And, and I don't blame her. Like, I wasn't a wonderful partner. I was still mourning the loss of my former wife, and,
Right.
but, that just, with hindsight, I now recognize that it was coming, but in the time I didn't. And once again, like, my world kind of collapsed around me. And I'd also traveled abroad at that point, and right before she told me this. And so I was dealing with quite a lot of jet lag,
Mhm.
and I'd gotten sick. And so I basically didn't sleep for like 4 days straight. Everything was just sort of out of whack, and all these emotions sort of coming back up in me again. And it was almost a year ago, I think. Well, it was just over a year ago. It was October 13th of last year. I hadn't slept, it said, about 3 days or 4 days. And I was talking to a friend on the phone at like 9 o'clock in the morning, and I suddenly just like lied to them and said that my mom was calling the other line and I had to go. And I walked upstairs and just grabbed every pill on the counter in my place and just swallowed them. It was almost in like an autonomic state, like I wasn't really conscious of what I was doing. And right after doing that, I like looked in the mirror, and I instantly kind of, if I can swear, I was just like, fuck, like, what have I done? And
I think you've earned the right to say what to let's not get
yeah,
too crude, but that's fair.
yeah. And I ran outside quickly, and I saw my neighbor next door, and I started banging on her window. And I was like, I've made a horrible mistake. You need to call 911. And so luckily she did. And I went into her place, and I basically just passed out. And I started going in and out of consciousness, and the paramedics came. And, once again, being in a small town, I knew all the paramedics, and,
Of
I
course.
knew the police officer on the scene. So, there's all this other like guilt and shame that comes along with that.
Right.
Um, and I got taken to the hospital in Calgary, which is about an hour drive away. And while I was there, I got taken to the same ward or same hospital that Laura died in. And so I
Oh.
realized that. And so I started to go back into sort of having like a massive panic attack there. And they bring you in to see a psychiatrist. And so they pumped my stomach, and then a psychiatrist was there and did an assessment. And he's like, look, I can't, I don't think that you're a further harm to yourself. So, you're free to go, but I'd recommend that
Yeah.
you get psychiatric care. Like, you're
Mhm.
in this, you're here right now, you're in the system. It's hard to see a psychiatrist. Like, there's just, it's just difficult, after
Right.
COVID. There's not that many of them in Canada. It's like, you're in the system. This is probably the easiest way to go about it. And so I pondered that for a little bit, and I decided that the best course of action was to commit myself.
Thank
So
goodness you made that decision.
yeah, but it's a hard one though, because, on paper, you're this, I'm a professional athlete, lawyer, and the
Yeah.
next morning I woke up in a psychiatric ward at a
Right.
hospital,
Right.
which is, further humbling and hard. And the reality and so I ended up spending 10 days there, which which was incredibly valuable. And my rationale there was, if I compromise the process here, I'm going to compromise my recovery down the road. I do not want to end up here again
Right.
in 6 months or a year or 5 years, because, as you say, if you push those things down and don't deal with them, they grow strength over time, and they come back up and bite you. And so I'm really glad I spent the time there. And I just spent a lot of time sort of working on myself, and writing, and speaking with professionals. And when I got out, I started, I've been keeping up therapy going every couple of weeks, which has been, incredibly useful. And and I can say that a year later, I'm genuinely like in a very good place, like quite happy and grounded. And these, like life events, which happens, like life continues to happen, and you're going to have up and downs, and they no longer, I've had a few things happen, and my response hasn't been catastrophic. In fact, I've been able to, it's not like, I think it's good to still have like emotions and to be able
Right.
to deal with it. But, there's, my emotional regulation
Yeah.
is far more stable these days. And so one of the things I realized I needed to do was to leave my home in Canmore. Unfortunately, there was
Right.
just too many ghosts there for me. It was a little too difficult.
And so
Um,
where did you move to now?
and so I live in Squamish, British Columbia.
Okay.
So it's another kind of mountain town, but I wanted to go somewhere where I already had a community, and
Yeah.
so I had a lot of friends here. It was a little closer to work for me as well.
Hmm.
And so that it's been a really good move. And although, I mean, the funny thing is, uh, I moved to Squamish last December. And for anybody who knows, the west coast of Canada is like one of the rainiest, darkest, coldest places possible.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like, who moves to who moves to like a really rainy, cold place where they're suffering from depression? It's
Right. Yeah.
a few months, I was like, huh. Alberta, even though it can be quite cold, it's a really sunny place.
Right. But at least you get out and do things. I'm sure even if it's raining, you're
Oh
outside.
no, for sure. No, exactly. No, I still get outside. That's something that for me, I'm really fortunate to have that as an outlet, and it continues to be a really healthy one for me. But then conversely though, I mean, there's healthy and unhealthy ways of getting outside. If you're going outside rather than actually dealing with your issues,
Right.
then that's a problem. So I think it's great to have these like external outlets, but you also need to spend time actually like addressing the issues. And so that's something that I'm trying to be a lot more careful, like, conscious of doing these days. So continue to do therapy. Writing is a really big outlet for me as well. And sharing my journey, I found that to be
Yeah.
useful as well. For one, I hopefully it can potentially help somebody else. And because I've suffered, some of these tragedies, and just trying to make sense of them as well. So writing and sharing helps me make sense of it a little bit as well. And it also kind of makes it feel a little less scary and intimidating if it's out there in the world. People know what
Right.
I'm dealing with, and that vulnerability has been a blessing as well, because it allows other people to open up and share with me, and sort of normalizes the
Right.
fact that, I've dealt with a lot of stuff. Like I've gone through
For sure.
hard things. So it's understandable that like I've had ups and downs. And so that level of acceptance with it.
Have you had any negative comments?
Not really.
I
No,
figured
people,
no.
no, I mean, that's like, I've had a couple people say some dumb things.
Right.
Um, but like I mean, I share quite publicly on social media, especially, which, a lot of people have negative interactions with, or negative perceptions with, but
Of course.
that's not my experience. I would say that 99.9% of comments and feedback has been great. I did see once a comment, somebody said, "Oh, another white privileged person, complaining about how hard their life was." Um,
Right.
and that's, I
Not
don't know. That's one person's comment out of like
right.
literally hundreds of thousands of other comments. So it's something I give no weight to.
Right. And that person probably would have complained no matter what.
I
They've
mean, and they may have not even have read my story or have known what happened,
probably not.
right?
Right.
So
Those are the people that want to go online and complain about anything,
exactly.
because they get too wrapped up in somebody else's life instead of just kind of
Yeah,
focus on their
and
own.
they may also not be real. They might also be a bot,
Yeah.
which is unfortunately a reality out there as well. So
Right.
some of these things are just literally computer codes that like
Right.
look at keywords and just like make horrible comments. So
So if you after all these experiences that you've had, um, is there any kind of lasting advice that you would give somebody that's kind of going through those things? I know that's a big question, but
yeah. Well, no, I'd say that there is. The biggest thing for me has actually been the power of vulnerability, and sharing. I would highly recommend that anybody get therapy and counseling, and do those things also like when life's going well.
Yeah,
Like a lot of us wait until we're struggling to go and get those things. But if you can get the coping skills ahead of time, um, then that's even better.
right,
Think about it, and when things are good, it's kind of like, I don't know, bad analogy, but like, eating well and getting exercise so you don't get sick rather than waiting to go to the doctor. If you can keep the doctor at bay, you're doing
right.
a lot better for yourself. So I think, seeing a therapist or just developing those tools in good times is probably one bit of advice. So reading about some of the coping strategies. But then, yeah, I think the vulnerability piece and not being afraid to share and letting people know that you're struggling.
That's
Um,
incredibly important, I think, especially in our chosen career paths where, there's almost a feeling that you're not supposed to have feelings, right? Like you're not supposed to have that vulnerability because then, you show weakness and people take advantage of that. And I don't know if that serves lawyers well or people well, because it's not a good way to think about things.
no, I mean, it doesn't serve your clients well either. When I was really struggling with my, so I did go back to work like quite quickly after Laura died. Got my practice going a little bit, and because I wanted to have a sense of normalcy in my life.
Right.
And after a few weeks, I was actually dealing with an estate matter, and I was like, I can't do this. Like I was
It's
like,
too triggering.
it was too triggering, and I actually, like, no offense to my clients, but I just didn't care
Right.
either. I was like, this just it was like, it wasn't, I mean, it was important for the family, but it wasn't, it was like, it was kind of, they were fighting over something that was like fairly inconsequential, like,
Right.
which we all do on occasion. It felt very important to that family at the time, and that's I'm not going to delegitimize what they were dealing with, but the big scheme of things, it felt quite petty. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, if I'm feeling this way, then I am not representing my client's interests well at all. Like, so
Right.
I put my practice on pause, took a step back, and had a chat with my colleagues about what I was dealing with. And then I went and did some soul searching, and I realized I actually did not return to that practice because it didn't feel right for me. And fortunately, I'm in a position where I could do that as well. Not everybody has the benefit of that, but I do think that, letting your colleagues know, letting, you know, just people in your life know what you're struggling with and what you're dealing with,
Hmm.
uh, and doing it kind of earlier as well, rather than letting it really simmer,
Right.
before it gains a lot of strength and traction over you, is definitely the best approach.
I think those are all really good pieces of advice, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's been way too long, and
Yeah.
I was excited to get a chance to do that. And I wish you all the best, and I hope this is helpful for somebody.
Yeah.
There's a story in New Brunswick that there was a girl who went to the emergency room, and I think her family took her in, and it was a year or two ago, and they basically turned her away. There was no psychiatrist there. They turned her away, and she died by suicide not long thereafter. And it's really just shameful that we can't find ways, um, you know, to be empathetic and to hold space for people. And I feel like you're lucky that at least you recognize that right at that moment that you had done the wrong thing, and you went next door, and you got
Yeah.
the help and got the neighbor there. Thank goodness that, and you're able to speak to other people and say, listen, like, I know
Yeah.
I know this is not the direction that you want to go, and I've learned the hard way.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that, maybe this can help somebody as well, is the reality is I actually didn't want to die. Like I
Right.
would, like I actually love my life. I live a great life, and I want to
Right.
like live a really long life. In that moment, it was suicide just felt like the best and only option that I had. But
Right.
and it wasn't. But in that moment, with what I was dealing with and sort of where my head and emotional state were at, that felt like the best option for me. But it wasn't that I actually wanted to die. I just didn't want to feel the pain I was feeling in that moment.
Right.
So I think that's, I think that's an important statement to make as well, because it's a lot of us, like, I never would have guessed, as you said, you never would have guessed I'd be somebody that
Not at
contemplates
all.
suicide.
No.
And I still don't, but it's something that, a few life situations where we're all just a couple steps away from that possibility.
Right.
So yeah,
So it's important to recognize that
it
and
is.
have empathy for people and understand that, none of us are immune to that.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Take
And
care.
best luck to everybody out there. Best luck to you. And yeah,
Yeah,
like
thank
hopefully
you.
actually get to see each other in person one day.